Peace, peace, and welcome. I'm back with another dope conversation ahead of us. I met this good brother, Mr. Howard, through an organization called School Board Partners. He's um, not only changing the world and from East Baton Rouge, he looks incredibly fly while he does it. I'm excited to get into his story, what led him to public service, the type of issues he's really interested in moving forward in his town. And we have a shared love for the 49ers. Maybe we'll jump in on that for a second. But, we're also in a very critical time in our country. And of all things that I think shine in the Black community, Mr. Howard is a great representation of that. So we can get his thoughts on, all of the current events related to George Floyd and what the response of the country should be, what he's seeing in this hometown. With no further ado, School Board Member Howard.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to meet other brothers doing the work and just really being a part of this movement of like representation and leadership. And I think the time is now more than ever for us to have a seat at the table and actually have a productive seat at the table and not just holding a seat at the table. So it's an honor to be here. I'm excited to share my story and for your viewers to learn more about who I am and the work that I do. So yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah. So Tramelle Howard, I pronounced your first name correctly, right?
That is correct, Tramelle Howard.
Okay. So on your school board, are you called a commissioner or a trustee or school board member? How does it work?
We are called school board members. We have a 9-member board broken out by districts based off of the location that you live in your particular city. Well, in our city, in our case, Baton Rouge. So yeah, a 9-member board broken out by districts, and I represent District 3, which is one of our largest districts and one of our largest minority districts. Majority of my district is housed by African Americans. So been on the board for 2 years. And it's been a journey. It's been a journey.
Yeah. And you're vice president now, right?
I am. I was actually elected vice president my second week on the board. And then my colleagues re-voted for me for a second term. Awesome. Earlier this year. And again, I say it's been a journey. Elected leadership was not something that I desired per se. It's just one of those paths that it was the right thing to do, I feel like. And so here I am. I never in a million years thought that I would be sitting on anyone's school board, yet alone operating as the vice president of the second largest school district in our state. But like I said earlier, it's been a learning experience. There's been a lot of trying times, and especially being, young. I was the youngest elected board member ever in our history. So just that, that ageism that exists in the world. But it's been a learning experience, but a good learning experience. And I've really appreciated the support from my community. More specifically, my students, my former students are just thrilled that I sit on the school board. And I mean, literally every day they're calling, asking about, Mr. Howard, this happened. What can you do to my teacher? I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's been a rewarding experience, specifically because of my students seeing someone who was in front of them as a teacher now in the position to make policy decisions that impact their education on a day-to-day basis. So more than anything, I'm honored to be in this role, and I'm honored to represent my community and specifically my students.
Yeah, that's what's up. Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Baton Rouge. I started off my school tenure in East Baton Rouge Parish Schools. I went to East Baton Rouge Parish Schools all the way up until 9th grade. And then 10th grade, I transferred to a parochial school that is still in East Baton Rouge Parish, still in my district. So I've been going to schools in my district for all of my life. So it's really cool to now be on this side as the actual school board member representing my district. Baton Rouge is my heart. I love this city. I love this place. And I'm just doing anything that I can to plant seeds to make sure that students coming up in my community have the same opportunities that I had growing up, and that, we really allow education to change the life trajectory of so many kids and so many students, because I know what it did for my life. And so I'm just hoping and praying that everything and every decision that I make is in the best interest of kids to have that same opportunity that I had to utilize education as a building block to success, a building block to financial freedom, a building block to opportunity.
That's what's up. Talk a little bit about your home situation. Well, you have siblings or
Yeah. So I grew up in a single parent home. My mom got pregnant with me when she was 17 years old. So she was still in high school. And that's a story in itself. My mom sacrificed so much so that I can have the opportunity to have discussions like this, have the opportunity to share my platform with others. And she has been my biggest supporter and my biggest fan throughout this. I have a younger brother and sister, as well as some additional siblings that are not my mom's kids, but my dad's kids. But my grandparents played an important role in making sure that my mom had the support to give me the opportunities. I like to tell people all the time that I grew up hood rich. Like, I know we were in poverty, but I never really wanted for anything. Like, I had the latest shoes. I always had food on the table. And not really understanding at that moment that my mom was sacrificing so much. She didn't have a college education, so she was probably making the bare minimum as it relates to finances, but she never, ever let her situation influence or affect my life. And I'm forever grateful for the sacrifices that she made and the sacrifices that my grandparents made to give her that additional village that it takes to raise a child. And so, me and my mom are like best friends to this day. I mean, I can go to her with anything that's going on in my life, specifically holding her off when people try to attack me publicly. Because, Mama Bear, don't play that. And so it's really interesting to watch her. Like, I'm like, no, Mom, it's fine. Like, I'm fine. You don't have to engage with folks when they, are attacking for whatever reasons. But so yeah, my family is my pride and joy. Everything that I do is to ensure that the younger folks in my family see that no matter your situation, you can make it. And my grandfather had a ninth grade education, and he's like my hero. He didn't understand much about education because he stopped going to school in ninth grade, but he knew that education was the way to change your or shift your outcome. And so he was very instrumental in making sure that I focused in school, cared about school, and really used school or utilized school as an opportunity to get to a level of success that that they all desire for me. They pushed me to do all the things that I thought I wanted to do, to take part in all of the activities that I thought I wanted to. And again, they made so many sacrifices that now I'm just realizing. And so I'm forever indebted to my grandparents and to my mom for the things that they've done to help me get to this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you got some good support and structure. And were you? And it sounds like that you got a lot of emphasis on school. Were you a strong student?
Yeah, I mean, I used to tell my kids this all the time, like when they were complaining about work and all these. I absolutely love school from Head Start on. Like, my mom never had to come to school to correct behaviors and all. I absolutely loved school, and I think it was just one of those things that, like, I used to play school at home. Like, I played the teacher, so with my siblings, and so, like, school was just always something that I loved. And so when kids just like, oh, Mr. Howard, I don't want to do this, I'm like, man, when I was in school, like, I absolutely loved it. So I was a strong student. I graduated my 5th grade class as a salutatorian. I always talk about that story because it just makes me feel so proud to just get all these academic awards and, like, really feel like I was, like, doing something as it relates to education. And then I went on to a magnet program after 6th grade. So I just always loved school, always enjoyed being in school. And, I try to instill it into other folks that, at a very young age, when you want better for your life and better for your situation. And so you have to do the necessary things to make some sacrifices, to make sure that you get to this point. And so Yeah, I always loved school. I, I'm what people probably would call the teacher's pet. All my teachers love me. So, I had a pleasant experience in school.
Nice. Where'd you go to college?
So I went to undergrad at the University of Louisiana Lafayette. Shout out to Lafayette, Louisiana.
Okay.
Then I went to law school at Southern University, the Southern University, as we so graciously say,
Okay.
in Louisiana. Again, I've always loved school. I had a great undergrad experience. I had a phenomenal law school experience. And both of these institutions to this day have played a tremendous role in where I am today. My chancellor from law school actually called me last week just to do a wellness check. And so, like, that level of love that you receive at historically black colleges is just second to none. And so I'm very grateful for the continued support of my institutions, even, in the work that I do now.
Yeah, you educated. You got a law degree, all of that.
Just a little educated. But again, I think it goes back to my grandfather in ninth grade with his ninth grade education. He always told me, like, you continue to get more, and you continue to gain knowledge, and you continue to ensure that you have the tools that no one can take away from you. And education is that tool. No one can ever, no matter what they do, no matter what they say, no matter how you look, they can never take away the education that you've received. And it really sets you up to be in some places that, we're not sometimes welcomed in. And that's unfortunate. That's an unfortunate reality. But because of education, you know how to really navigate and maneuver in this very crazy world that we live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was actually just thinking about that. Speaking this craziness. So I think it's dope that you committed yourself to education. You got you furthered your education, and now you are making policy on behalf of the community that you grew up in. I think that it sounds like you're very, very committed to the state of Louisiana and your community. And we've been going through a lot as a country, right? It was like first COVID happened, and then we all went to shelter in place. And as a fellow policymaker, that whole rollout was like, it was hard for a lot of us, right?
Extremely difficult.
And then there was, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
Ahmaud Arbery. Yeah.
Say it again.
Also Ahmaud. Yep.
Yeah. What's the tone in Baton Rouge right now? What's going on there?
That the week of George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor's and Ahmaud was a heavy week. It was heavy to be Black in America. It was heavy to be a Black man in America. It was heavy to be someone who wants to instill into the future generations that there's hope, when time after time after time after again, that hope keeps getting knocked down. And it's been so unfortunate. And for a long time, I didn't really have the words to express how I was feeling. I cried multiple nights because, here where I am from, we had our own situation with Alton Sterling a few years back. And so, we're still going through the trauma of that situation because no one was charged with his murder. I mean, it was clear as day that it was murder. And so to keep reliving these traumatic experiences as a Black man on camera, it's tiring, it's exhausting, it's frustrating, and especially frustrating when you find yourself like a part of the system, quote unquote. Because as elected members, like, we are absolutely a part of the system that has historically just underserved us and underrepresented us. And so it's like you get it on two folds. It's like, man, we do all of these things every day to maintain status quo, but like, what are we really doing to make sure systemic racism is not occurring in the field that we focus in every day? So while it was a knee on George Floyd's neck in Minnesota, there has been countless knees on the necks of African American students in education that we as now people who are working to fight against that, it's just tough. It's a tough spot to find yourself in. And just like some of my constituents, I've been mad as hell and angry and frustrated and not really having the answers. So it's tough. We've had protests here in Baton Rouge, very peaceful protests and very, matter of fact, getting to what we desire as it relates to police reform in our city. But, I don't judge the level of how people protest, because I can't be the one to tell people how to express their anger. And to be Black in America, you have some built up anger in you based off of the way America has treated us in a country that we built for free. And so it's been tough. And bringing it, bringing it all to where I am living in Baton Rouge right now, we have a school, Lee Magnet High School, that's named after a Confederate general. And we have been, one of my board members wrote an open letter to the school board to ask to rename this particular school. And we actually had a board member, another one of my colleagues, get on TV and talk about how we need to learn our history. And if we knew our history, we would know that Robert E. Lee was someone who freed the slaves. He inherited all of these slaves and he just freed them into this open, free land. And, to have people that you serve with still have this mindset in an 80% African-American school district, it's just problematic. So, America, we have some work to do. And I just really think it's time for people, specifically people who benefit from privilege, to sit down, shut up, and listen to how we experience this world as Black Americans. And so, yeah, it's been a tough couple of weeks, but we're here to fight the good fight. Yeah. I tell people all the time, I can disagree to agree in the sense of respectability politics, but one thing I will not stand for and ever be silent on is racism. I will speak on it. I will call out silence is violence. I will call out systems of privilege. And, sometimes that's not respected in the political landscape, but we have been given too many opportunities to be in some of these spaces, and we've been silent. So now we have to be louder than ever and really make sure that our voices are reflective in what's happening in this country.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but it's kind of crazy. I don't want to rush over that. 80% African-American district, and Robert E. Lee freed the slaves.
And Robert E. Lee freed the slaves. I mean,
wow.
It was,
hold on, wait. I mean, all right. So I don't want to give ignorance too much power either, right? But it's an interesting story with the state of Louisiana itself, right? Like, so I went to the first time I went to it. The only time I went to a plantation, a former slave plantation, was in Louisiana. It was like this tour that you take out of New Orleans. And it was like a very charged experience for me, right? Because, we all I've had my issues with the police, or, discriminatory behavior, or straight up whatever. But going back to see where it all happened was like a very charged emotional experience for me, right? And in Louisiana, the as I'm saying things that you already know, like New Orleans being the slave port and it being the birthplace of jazz, and all these cultural innovations that came out of New Orleans, but it being a conservative state with a lot of Black people there, people very, very committed to the legacy of Robert E. Lee. And so one of my first times visiting New Orleans, and you're not in New Orleans, you're in the capital, right? But this is I haven't had the privilege of going to Baton Rouge. There was this huge statue in the middle in the St. Charles with Robert E. Lee on the top of it. And I'm I'm like, how does a city 60% black have a huge statue? Like, I didn't get it, I didn't get it. And when the white mayor took it down, Mitchell Landry, I think his name
Mick
is.
Landry. Mm-hmm.
I was like, recently,
Mm-hmm.
So like the mentality there, I think it's so crazy to somebody from California. Like, wow, these people really out here banging for E. Lee in 2020.
Like, I mean, it's so, I just don't understand in 2020, like, why are we having conversations related to symbols of Confederacy? And what I really just is mind boggling to me is that, the supporters of this particular, supporting history and heritage and X, Y, and Z. But what does that history and heritage represent? And so that's one aspect of it. Like, it's symbols of oppression, it's symbols of slavery, it's symbols of like traumatic racism, it's symbols of all of these negative things that have played out in our country over time. But then when you just, bring it back in, like, you are a policymaker on a board in a public school system that's responsible for making decisions for these students. So if that's your mindset, it's going to be reflective in the policy decisions that you make. And so, like, we have to get past these symbols of oppression representing history. If we tell the truth, the history that it represents is not reflective of the land of the free and the home of the brave, as you quote unquote like to so graciously sing all the time. And so if we're talking about liberty and justice for all, like, that history is not reflective of liberty, justice for nobody, specifically for my Black brothers and sisters in this country. And so, I'm on a mission to tell the truth and shame the devil, as my grandma would say, because it's just ridiculous that we're even having these conversations in 2020. But again, the landscape of the country, the landscape of America, we see it playing out in our face right now. And I think for the murder, after George Floyd was murdered, I think that people always ask, like, does it feel different? Is something different about this time? And to me, it does feel different. And I think the reason that it feels different is because of the timing. So for the first time in history, and at least more recent history, America was put at a standstill and sit down by COVID. And so every single thing that's happening around the world, we are like having 24 hours to be vigilant around it. So while we as Black folks have been experiencing this for a very long time, people haven't been able to sit down and listen because their powers and privileges and priorities were more important than social issues that were going on in the world. So right now they have an opportunity to actually see all of this play out in front of them. They can't leave out to go to work because work is at home. Like, all of these things are playing out in the world right in front of us. And I think COVID was a gift and a curse for that, because it gives America a time to see that the things that are trivial to you are really life or death for other folks. And so, I think that this time is different. But then again, you see what happened in Atlanta over the weekend. So we're just constantly fighting to let our voices be heard. And like people like often say, like, America should be thankful that all we want is equality and not revenge, because this country has been truly disrespectful to Black folks. And we just wake up every day. We entertain the world. We showcase our talents for the world to see. And not much has changed. And so we need to really flip it all over and start over. But, I'm here to do what I can to ensure that educational justice occurs through policy.
Yeah, and I want to get into some of that. And just for reference sake, the incident you're talking about was the young man that was young unarmed Black man that was killed outside of Wendy's, and they burned the Wendy's down.
Yep.
And as protesters, as a response, maybe not necessarily quote unquote protesters, angry citizens as a response burned down the Wendy's that the young man was killed leaving. And
I mean, if I could just for 2 seconds touch on, like, because oftentimes people when situations like what happened in Atlanta occur, the thing that they want to talk about is the burning down of the Wendy's, like the symbolism of the Wendy's. And when you're really missing a bigger picture about what led to that as it relates to like the anger and frustration that's been built up. But let's be very clear. America was not created on this, let's just go rally out and be, so quiet and just get this new land and discover. This country was discovered after your boy, CC, as I refer to him as, and just basically took over someone else's, like basically stole land from the Native Americans. And so like this whole idea that everything has to be peaceful and that we get to a point of like justice through just being so proper and silent and that changes the world. That's not how this world was founded. Now, I'm not recommending people go burn down buildings in their community, but I'm also saying like we have to have an honest conversation about where we are and how we got here in order to understand the pain and frustration that people are really dealing with as we go through these different situations.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. And I mean, I think you somewhat understated when you said stole, because and I know the case with like genocide and murder and the complete annihilation of entire communities and after they learned how to work the land from the people, so and that happened with not just Columbus, but several others that came over to the New World, and yeah. So the Nat Turner response, right? So I want to talk about symbolism, right? Versus because you talked about the symbol of Ely, and we may disagree on this, and it'd be interesting to see what the conversation goes, But in response, I'm seeing people that sympathize with the need for change, advocating for symbolic change. And so, like, what's the difference between symbolic change and transformative change? And so for someone like me, who has been consistently confronted with an achievement gap issue, affecting Black children, right? I'm kind of over the symbols. At the same time, during my term on the school board, all the media attention I got was over symbols. Like I replaced the Pledge of Allegiance with quotes from Black women, and like that people like flipped out, right? That Breitbart wrote about that, Fox News covered it, right? And then we had issues with we tried to cover up this mural that had dead Native Americans as slaves, and that was like all over the news, right? Symbolic gestures get all this attention, and but the transformative stuff would be, 40 acres and a mule, right? So I started joking. I was like, "Oh, it should be 40 million in the bins." I was like, "That's my new joke. It should be
40 million in the bins." That's happy.
So in terms of the types of suggestions that you're seeing right now, like what types of reforms that's been coming up in the conversation, the national conversation, do you think are worth pursuing?
So first thing I would say is that I think, and to answer your question about symbolic change versus transformational change, I believe that we have to take a step back and realize that it can be a both-end approach. For example, what happened in DC, the Black Lives Matter mural that was painted on the streets in DC. I think that's symbolic change, but I believe that some things needs to be right in people's face to see over and over and over again.
Powerful. I like that. We did it in the city too. We did it here too. But
great. So I'm hoping that we get in Baton Rouge soon. But I think it's important for people to see. And so while there was a lot of people that came out and said, "Oh, well, this may be just like a Band-Aid or whatever," I think that we have to get away from the either-or approach and realize that symbols matter, which is why there are so many people trying to keep these symbolic symbols of oppression up because they just love the symbols or whatever. So they're paying attention to symbols. So I think we can do both ends. We can have symbols, we can wear our Black Lives Matter, we can talk about all of these things. And then on the policy side, So I understand the whole idea of defunding the police. So many people disagree with the way it's presented of defunding the police, but I absolutely understand what it means, because in my state we have defunded education, we have defunded healthcare over and over again, and what we have done is take resources from those two institutions and put them in other places to uh, save budget holes, or to close budget holes, or to do all of these things. So when people say defund the police, like when that's the spectrum of the large audience, I agree, because all you're doing is taking money that would typically go to police and putting it into other programs that will increase public safety. And so, like, defund versus abolishment has to be the conversation. I don't think no one means to abolish the police, because we know that for certain areas of public safety, like police are necessary. But in the current state that we're living in, like, we've tried police reform, we've tried body cameras. None of this seems to be truly working. So when you say something as, to me, powerful as defundment, like, first of all, people start listening that were not truly listening before. And, people start to put things in motion that will have a larger impact than just police reform. Because we thought here in Louisiana and and other places that body cameras will be the answer to ultimate police reform. And we see now that the first thing that happens when an incident of this nature occurs, either the body camera falling off, it takes us 6 months to get the footage. Like, it hasn't worked as a true reform. So defunding means, like, hey, we're going to take money away from you to give to community programs, to build up community pride, so that folks will, do things and have the resources to connect to things that ultimately lead to a more well-rounded community. And so I think defunding the police is a step in the right direction. I think that it should be talked about, and people should realize that defundment does not mean abolishment, and that defundment is necessary in order to really invest in our community, so that they can have the resources, so that we can have the resources necessary to be thriving individuals. I mean, we all want to thrive, not just survive. And so our communities for so long have just literally been surviving, and now it's time for us to thrive. So I think defunding the police is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. One of the so I've been critical. I've been on the camp of, like, I don't believe in that until it happens, right? And the reason why I say that is because, like, I've been pushing the symbol change, and I'm still doing that. I don't have any big issues with the sentiment around defunding the police, but the way I'm saying in the facetious way, like 40 million in the bins, it's kind of like it's like reparations, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we've seen this corporate response with statements and contributions and a reallocation of city money, right? But families, like, what happened to the Black family through mass incarceration, through discriminatory housing policy, through discriminatory hiring policy, through a disinvestment in education, like the family was dismantled. And families need to be repaired, and economic independence is something that the country, I think, can help advance through checks, right?
Yeah.
Like, cut the check.
Listen, they fund all kind of other programs, other things that are targeted at a specific group. Because I mean, basically every large group whose America has wronged, they've done something specific to that group to make it right, except for Black people. So we don't even need to say no more. Like, America has righted a lot of their wrongs in other communities, in some form of repayment, reparation, but they have not done that for the African American community. And you can do the research yourself to figure out how.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it is June of 2020. We're headed into the summer. You've been on the school board 2 years. You're vice president, and we've gone through this whole half the year is like not even done yet, you know.
Mhm.
And it's been 2020 has been like wow,
A
right?
year.
Um, what is like how are you approaching the next few months? Like what are you thinking about in terms of your policy work, and we can get into some other areas of your life too. Your day
Yeah.
job also after that.
Yeah. So as it relates to what's happening in the East Baton Rouge Parish school system, one of the biggest things, we will actually be electing a new superintendent on Thursday. So a lot of my energy and time has been interviewing candidates and interviewing folks to see how they can bring true transformation to our school district. So on Thursday, we will be selecting a new superintendent. I've been very clear that I will be voting for Dr. Nakia Towns, which is one of our finalists for superintendent. It's just a time and place that I believe, and so this has been a conversation that's come up in our district a lot. We represent 80% African American students, about 10% other minority students, and then about another 10% of white students. I believe that a leader and a superintendent should reflect the district that they make up. And far too many times, our kids in our district, they don't see teachers who look like them. They don't see administrators who look like them. They don't see advocates who look like them because a lot of education stakeholders are not reflective of the kids that they represent and advocate for. So representation matters, and I believe that in our leader, we should have one who is reflective of our student population. And not only that, the message is important, but the messenger is just as important. So yeah, I believe that that's been my focus is really getting folks to understand why representation matters today, yesterday, and will matter forever as it relates to really transforming the school district. We have been working also on this. I think another thing that COVID um, kind of told us, gave us a visual around, is the inability for some families to have connectivity as it relates to internet access, as it relates to device access. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out what we can do as a large school district to bridge the gap. Because what we know from COVID is that the learning loss, specifically for minority students, specifically from students from low income families, is going to be widened because of COVID. And that's a reality, and that's just how we need to approach it. There was already a large achievement gap between those subgroups and other students. So the achievement gap has further widened because of COVID. So we need to address the learning loss. So that's been something that I've been really focused on, trying to figure out what steps we can take to ensure that we address the learning loss to the best of our abilities and plan going forward to have additional resources available to address the learning loss. So that's been my primary focus as we go through and prepare for the next school year. I do believe that with a new superintendent, we will be able to just get a restart, kind of seeing things from an outside perspective to see what things we need to change as far as efficiency are concerned, to just make sure that education works for everyone. Everybody always talks about all of these things, but if we're truly being honest with ourselves, systems, specifically systems in education, have not served Black and Brown students the way it's served our white affluent students. It has not served low income families the way it's served affluent families. So yeah, we just have to start telling the truth and figuring out how we can plant seeds daily that will eventually blossom into a garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an exciting time when you I mean, if you get the superintendent person you want, it's exciting. But when when a new person comes in, there's like some new energy,
There's
and
new energy. Yep.
there's like some things to kind of there's some adjustment that happens. There's new conversations that come up, um, and you get to set a new course. Um, what do you do outside of the school board role? What's your day job?
So I work for the Education Trust. The Education Trust is a national nonprofit organization. We specifically focus on educational equity as it relates to low income and Black and Brown students. So our everyday focus is to ensure that policy is equitable and that it's equitable specifically for that subgroup of folks. Because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times there is a underrepresented voice for Black and Brown students and low income students. And so we work hard to ensure that policy that districts and states and nationally is adopted is beneficial to those subgroup of students. It's phenomenal work. I enjoy the work that we do as an organization at Education Trust. I also just enjoy having two feet. I say 2 foot, 2 feet in the battlefield because I do this as an elected member, but I also do it as an advocate. And so every single day, I wake up thinking about Black and Brown students and students from low-income families. And that's what I fight for as a member of my school board. And that's what I fight for as a member of the Education Trust family. And every single day, I want education to work for every single student in this country. And that's what I hope that my work shows. And I hope that my legacy will be fighting for educational freedom for students, specifically marginalized students.
And are you on, back to your school board, are you on 4-year terms or 2 years?
We are on 4-year terms, yes.
Okay, so you're up in 2022.
So up in 2022, up in 2022, the election I think will be November of 21, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Literally the days run together. So when it's time to start thinking about what's next and if I'm running again and all those things, my campaign manager will be probably calling.
Right. What was it? So to touch a little on that before we wrap up too, just like the process for you to decide to run. Talk a little bit about what that decision-making process was like, and then I want to get into your experience actually with the campaign.
Yeah, so deciding to run, I never, ever wanted to run for office. I never wanted to be a politician. I never wanted to do any of those things because in my mind, like I would have to stop being who I was to like really be a politician because, you know, we talked about the respectability politics and not like I was just this wild Joe in the streets, but I really enjoy having a good time. I really enjoy just getting up every day and not having like news media and all these people trying to write articles about you. Like that was a lot. And so when I thought about a politician, that's exactly what I thought it would be. But I was a teacher. After law school, I actually joined Teach for America. And I started teaching 7th grade English in Rouge, Mississippi. And that very first day in the classroom in Rouge, Mississippi, I knew that teaching was where I was supposed to be. Education was where I was supposed to be. It was just a joy that, you know, like they say, like when you find things that you're supposed to be involved with, or you interact with things that you're supposed to be involved with, it's just a feeling that you can't describe. And that's how I felt in my first day in the classroom. I just can't describe the feeling of hope, the feeling of inspiration, the feeling of opportunity, and just the feeling of belonging somewhere and really feeling like you're making a difference. So I knew that would be in education. Fast forward, came back home to Baton Rouge, taught at Kenilworth Science and Technology, and let me just tell you, that place changed my life for the better. The interaction that I had with those students, my first year of like teaching was just one of the best years of my life, and I was surrounded by a support system that was grounded in the work, grounded in making sure that students felt loved and safe in an environment, and it was just phenomenal. And so I just continue to figure out how can I do more to impact the students who I saw every day. So during the first summer, I had an internship at the Department of Education, and we were having a meeting about something. And I asked a question about who had been a teacher or like what was their experience that they brought into the work. And only one person raised their hand. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. Like we're here making all of these policies related to teaching, and no one has had any direct experience with like what happens in the school system or what happens in school. Like, you had all these business minded people, and I was like, this is just weird. And so I was like, in order for me to really impact change based on my experience, I now have to get a seat at that table so that I can, understand, you know, these decisions that are made and like give a fresh perspective of why I think or how it would play out in the actual classroom. Even though I was a very novice teacher, I still had that experience of being in a classroom. But I still didn't think that was through elected office. So fast forward again, I went to a leadership training, and it was specifically targeted at young African-American men and women teachers who were interested in policy and elected leadership. And when I went to that conference, I just left with a spirit of hope, a spirit of determination, and a spirit of a drive to do something else to help my students who I saw every day. So I came back, and next thing you know, I was running for school board, and here we are.
Yeah. So the race, like, how many contenders? What was the outcome? What happened?
So I ran.
That's what at the end. But you won your first race, right?
I did. Yeah. First time out.
I lost my first race.
Oh, see.
Yeah.
I still to this day don't know what that experience would have been like. But, I've ran for like student government positions before. I haven't always been successful. So, that I kind of equated to that. But yeah, I ran against an 8-year incumbent. She had been on the board for 8 years. And, the unfortunate part about the person that I ran against is that being young and being energized around the work, I expected that my opponent would just, like, first of all, you're the incumbent. So, like, surely I'm not a threat. Like, surely you're not, like, trying to fear losing to me. But I just feel like there was a missed opportunity for a generation to pass the knowledge to make sure that we're actually being productive in this work. And it was more, in my opinion, about upholding to a seat, as opposed to like really sharing knowledge and wealth, to make things better for kids. Because I did it, my race had nothing to do with my opponent and everything to do with me feeling like I could be a fresh perspective and fresh voice for my students who I was in the classroom with. So that's why I ran. It wasn't about my opponent. And so I just wanted to be a voice for my community. So I ran against an 8-year incumbent. There were many people, including people within my own party, who said that, it wasn't my time, that I wouldn't be successful, that really tried to discourage me to sit this out and just wait until it was my time. But I had made up in my mind that I felt like my community wanted something different. And on election day, they showed that. They showed that they wanted something different. They showed that they wanted to get behind a candidate that represented them in a way that was transparent, that was like blunt, and they wanted a bold leader. And so I believe that my community elected me to do those things. And so every day I wake up with those constituents in mind, that I'm fighting for them. And while you may not always agree with the decisions that I make on a day-to-day basis, at the end of the day, my fight is for you and making sure that our students have an opportunity and have access to education that will change their life for the better. And so that's what I do. And that's why I approach this work the way I do.
Mm-hmm. What was the vote count?
It was like 52% to like 40-something%. Mm-hmm. But once they declared me the winner, I was really excited. I don't think I've still to this day like took the moment in to like, wow, you were really elected by like your community and people in this district who believed in you and believed in the work that you do. And so that's how I show up to this work every day. I show up as if I was still on the campaign trail trying to get a vote, in the sense of like, people want to see you, people want to be able to engage with you, and people want to be able to feel like their voice is being heard. And so I have an open line of communication with my constituents. So that it's been a fun ride with lots of challenges, but a fun ride.
Yeah. Well, we've reached the top of the hour. Vice President Howard, I appreciate you taking the time, sharing your story, sharing your perspective on, everything that's going on right now, and just having the courage to go out and put yourself out there and do good on behalf of good people. Louisiana has a lot of great people, man.
Yes, we listen. Well, we get policy wrong, we get people right. So yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here and to just share my story with your audience. I just hope that the stories of people like you and I will inspire the generation after us to know that there's no limits to the success that you can accomplish, and there's no limits to what you can do. And as much as America may try to make us less than, we are more than capable to do anything in this world that we put our minds to, and we will. We've survived a lot, and we will continue to survive, and eventually our communities will thrive as we should, as the Black kings and queens that we are.
I'm gonna leave it at that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, peace, and we out.